Politically, Greenland is European, but geographically, it's in North America. Almost 80% of the autonomous Danish territory is covered by a vast and single sheet of ice. But global warming is starting to expose the potential of mineral wealth that could challenge China's near monopoly of rare earths. I'm Divi Gopalan, and you're watching Connected on Taiwan Plus. To understand why Greenland is becoming one of the most important regions reshaping global power, we're joined by Stefan Bernstein, a geologist and CEO of GreenRoc Strategic Materials from Copenhagen in Denmark. He's also leading GreenRoc's Amitsoq graphite project in southern Greenland. And we also have Reinhard Biedermann, Professor of International Relations at Tamkang University's Department of Global Politics and Economics in New Taipei City. Great to have you both on. I'm going to start with you, Stefan. And first, let you set the scene here. What is GreenRoc? Just to give us a sense of what GreenRoc is doing, particularly with your Amitsoq project that is happening in southern Greenland.
Yes, thank you. So GreenRoc Strategic Materials is a London-listed company, and we are a minerals development company focusing on critical raw materials, particularly for the energy transition. And we are, as you correctly say, are developing the Amitsoq graphite deposit in southern Greenland, basically reopening a graphite mine that was active about 100 years ago. And our aim is to extract graphite, concentrate from the mine, and ship it to a processing plant in Northern Europe, where we will process it into active anode material, which is a key component of lithium-ion batteries.
Okay, so interesting. And we will be a little later in the program going into what it will take to get to that graphite or other critical minerals and to finally make it commercially viable. But before we do that, Reinhard, tell us about Taiwan's interest and presence in the Arctic region.
Of course, in Taiwan, politics and science has an increasing interest in the Arctic region. One reason is, of course, China's interest. China has, since 2018, issued its Arctic strategy. Previously, also South Korea and Japan, and also Singapore. They are all observers of the Arctic Council since 2013. And Taiwan is rather a latecomer in this game. And of course, it's concerned about maritime shipping routes, for instance, in case the Arctic Sea route becomes a viable infrastructural corridor in future. This would have a strong effect on the cross trades, and maybe the South China Sea, the Suez Channel, would lose maybe relevance. And this would be detrimental for Taiwan's geopolitical interests. However, I want to also emphasize that so far Taiwan is mainly interested in scientific cooperation. It tries to add to public goods research. So Taiwan wants to add to the research that is ongoing in the Arctic already since a few years, and is therefore increasing also its visibility and simply its presence also, that it does not stay absent from the Arctic.
Okay, Stefan, so zooming in on Greenland, tell us about the international interest there, particularly in the critical minerals realm.
Yes, there's been a lot of interest recently about the potential supply of critical raw materials from Greenland. Both from Europe's side, but certainly also from the US. And it's not that there's a lot of production today, but there's a lot of opportunities and potential for Greenland to supply a range of critical raw materials. And we can see that just recently, 2 years ago, Ursula von der Leyen, executive president of the EU Commission, traveled to Greenland and signed a partnership agreement between the EU and Greenland. Greenland is not part of the EU, it's part of the Danish kingdom, a self-governing part of the Danish kingdom, but it has a status as an overseas country and territory to the EU.
So, Reinhard, you briefly talked about the possible opening up of shipping routes and how that might change quite a bit geopolitically. But why is it becoming strategically important, particularly when it comes to supply chains and, as Stefan mentioned, the critical minerals and other raw materials?
Well, the European Union, also the United States, they want to de-risk. So far, China still has a dominant position in the global supply of especially rare earth elements, especially the heavy rare earth elements, which are in need for not only renewable technologies, but also for the defense industries. So industrialized Western nations, they want to diversify from China. And Greenland surely will not replace China in the short, middle term, but it will at least increase to a diversification together with other destinations. So that is very important.
Right. Stefan, what would you say is the most important or perhaps significant untapped reserve that Greenland is currently holding in your point of view as a geologist?
So yes, when I just talked about potential for minerals in Greenland, and it's important, of course, to discern between potential for mineral deposits and mineral deposits that are actually found. And when I say it has a great potential, it's because it shares the same type of diverse geology with Canada and South Africa and other countries with a lot of minerals production. But for deposits that are actually been found and defined, we're mainly looking at the two different types, and that is rare earth element deposits, and then it's graphite, the one that we are focusing on. Those are the main commodities that can be brought into production within a relatively short time frame.
Okay, so to give our viewers and myself a little bit more context, what would graphite and what you're focusing on be used for, and what is it currently? What kind of supply are we seeing currently?
In terms of graphite, the largest need for graphite is as active anode material for lithium batteries. Currently, all of that material is sourced in China and supplied by Chinese producers. So obviously there's a huge interest in making more secure supply chains and also have a domestic supply of this critical raw material. So graphite as active anode material. The other important component in the future for graphite is the use as flexible graphite in the defense industry. Also, flexible graphite, which is another form of the mineral graphite, is supplied today 100% by China, which basically has a monopoly on supplying the industrial countries with this quite, you could say, sophisticated form of graphite.
Right. So one of the things happening is, of course, climate change, and that is exposing the potential of minerals on the land or under the ice in Greenland. But also, as Reinhard, you mentioned, the whole idea of shipping routes opening up. You touched on it already, but what would you say would be the biggest impact, or what is it that everyone is looking at when it comes to these shipping routes, particularly the US, Russia, China, all of them now starting to focus on the possible opening up of these areas?
Well, the fantasy is that the shipping connection between East Asia and Europe would be much faster, also much cheaper. It would be less, in case the Northern Sea route would become peaceful, it would be, the sea route would be less prone to potential conflicts like with the Horn of Africa, the Suez Channel, the Malacca Strait, the South China Sea, etc. So this is the fantasy, I would say, because so far, yes, it's possible to traverse the Northern Sea route already. However, the biggest shipping companies, they don't really take this shipping route quite often or put it in a regular program. So far, it's rather more experiments that are ongoing. And according to the information I had, the Northern Sea route for years to come will not be a viable route. So I think the fear Taiwan has that the Northern Sea route, the Central Arctic Sea route, will replace or really balance the current sea routes we have along the Southern Sea route. They are exaggerated yet. This won't happen so far.
Yet we see China has its own Arctic Silk Road or its own polar Silk Road strategy. Can you tell us a little bit more about that and what that means basically for the other countries competing to manage the resources or take advantage of resources there, and also for Taiwan?
Well, the Polar Silk Road is part of the Belt and Road Initiative of the Silk Road announced, the Belt and Road Initiative announced in 2013. 2018, in China's Arctic strategy, the Polar Silk Road was added. So far, the Polar Silk Road is mainly about resources, about LNG from Russia. So China has heavily invested in energy resources and LNG projects in Russia. However, in future, it should also include trading routes, should connect Shanghai, Ningbo, other Chinese trading ports with Hamburg, with Rotterdam. This is already working, but only to a very small number. So for Taiwan so far, I don't see that as really as a threat. However, in future, let's say in decades to come, the Northern Sea route de facto may become an important shipping route indeed.
Right, and what are your thoughts, Stefan, on these possible opening of shipping routes or the ice melting? And then when it comes to accessibility of these critical minerals with Greenland, expected to have about 25 of the US listed critical minerals present.
Yes, so first of all, I agree with Reinhard, of course, that there's a huge potential in shortening shipping routes across the Polar Sea and in the Arctic coasts, along the Arctic coast. And there, of course, Greenland plays a quite important role because it has access to the so-called Northwest Passage as well as the Northeast Passage. The sea routes are not really open yet, but it's likely that there will be with the increasing global temperatures. We already see a change in the climate in Greenland. We see melting of the inland ice, quite correct. However, I would like to stress that in itself doesn't really expose a lot of new ground to be explored. So it's not like because the ice is melting that new mineral deposits are becoming exposed. The inland ice is so thick that it's not really so much the edges of the inland ice that retreats. It's mainly smaller glaciers. So of course there will be some more land exposed, but not to the degree that some people may picture. The most important melting takes place in kind of the thickness of the ice and not so much the lateral extent of the ice.
Right.
And maybe what I want to add here is that it's of course not only about environmental issues and climate change, but of course also about geopolitical issues. We see now, of course, Russia invaded Ukraine, and since 2022, China's impact or influence on the Arctic has, of course, decreased due to that, because China has very close relations with Russia, is actively supporting Russia in its war with the Ukraine with supplies. So NATO became enlarged. Finland, Sweden became NATO members. So there's much more mistrust now in the Arctic, also in the Nordic countries, who were once very optimistic about China. And Denmark has even a so-called strategic partnership with China and was 15 years quite interested in Chinese investment in Greenland. However, this has completely changed due to geopolitical reasons. Another factor is that Russia has interests in commercialize the Northern Sea Route. This is correct, but it asks for quite high fees, which make the sea route so far also of little interest for economic exploitation, actually.
There have been around 140 mining licenses granted between 2003 and 2026, but there hasn't been any new significant mining projects over the past 2 decades. Why is that?
So I think that the licenses you refer to are mineral exploration licenses. Actual mining licenses are only like between 5 and 10. And that, of course, reflects that it takes a lot of work to discover mineral deposits. So even though you can see that the geologist's perspective, you have all the ingredients there, because they, by nature, will be mostly covered. And you have to look into the ground below the surface to find the mineral deposits. It's just a lengthy process, can often take up to 10, 15 years to discover. And Greenland is more remote than many areas in North America and Europe, for instance. It's not as remote as you may think, but it still requires a fair amount of logistics to approach the land and cover it with geodata and so forth. So there's a lot of investments that still are needed for actually discovering the mineral deposits.
Reinhard, how involved are Greenlanders themselves in mining exploration? Or is it mostly international interest and commercial companies from overseas?
Politically, the Greenland people enjoy domestic sovereignty. They have the right to decide what kind of mining explorations they would deem fit. And in the past, I recall more than a decade ago, media debates about investments from a company called London Mining created much debates in the society in Greenland. There were exaggerating media reports about thousands of workers coming from abroad to Greenland. Up to 50,000 people even would work in mines. Greenland has a population of 50,000, so of course those media reports and those concerns that were then raised, they had an impact on the political debate and on elections then actually also. So this is the one thing that mining projects, they may have an impact on social cohesion in Greenland due to the quite small population, because obviously you need workers from abroad to go into those mining projects. On the other hand, we have the Ilulissat Declaration from 2008, I think, that confirmed domestic sovereignty of nations on their resources. So this means that Greenland, again, has the free choice to decide what it wants to allow.
Right. So given that, Stefan, how does Amitsoq, a graphite project, currently fit? And this is purely from a commercial mining point of view, in the critical minerals landscape of Greenland. Where are you at in terms of exploration or getting to the point where towards production?
I mean, Greenland has a Greenlandic population. They decide nearly 80% of politics themselves. So it's only foreign policy and defense and justice that is presently covered by the Kingdom of Denmark. So every decision about extraction of minerals and the regulation of the minerals industry is governed by the government in Nuuk. When it comes to our project in South Greenland, it's quite different from what Reinhard was referring to minutes ago about some of those larger scale projects that, quite correctly, you're right, attracted a lot of discussions about 10 years ago or so. Those were very large scale projects. Our deposit is relatively small compared to those. It's a big deposit by standard for graphite deposits. But the actual mine and extraction will be a relatively small undertaking, employing about a maximum of 200, 250 people, of which we actually expect to have most of the jobs there covered by local workforce. And when I say local, it's primarily South Greenland people, but also, of course, coming from other parts of Greenland. And we are at the stage now where we have defined a large resource, 23 million tons with more than 20% graphite, which is about 3 times that of the average producing graphite mine today. And we expect to be at construction stage in about 2 years' time. And then with 2 years of construction, we'll be in the production by end of this decade.
Right, and so Stefan, what would you say is a takeaway for Taiwan here, as you know, as a country that relies heavily on its production of semiconductors for its economic, its GDP? Why should Taiwan be looking at Greenland? We talked about scientific interest right now, but what do you believe that we should be seeing from Taiwan?
So I think it's in everybody's interest, including Taiwan's interest, to, as Reinhard also pointed out, diversify our supply chains, in particular in the critical raw material space. Today, a lot of the supply chains are heavily dominated by, well, China mostly, but of course also other countries. And just diversifying that, of course, increases the the security, the supply security, but it also offers competition in the critical raw material space, which we're really lacking today. So I think it is important for particularly Taiwan, but other industrialized nations to think about how can they create an environment where the supply for their industries is coming from more than just one country, and also perhaps look a bit more about into how these resources are also produced. What are the ESG performance? What is the energy? How energy intensive is the processing? And how much CO2 emissions is associated with this? Does it make sense, for instance, to ship large amounts of, in terms of graphite, for instance, but it also is true for other raw materials, that it's sourced someplace, for instance, Africa, then shipped for about 30 days to China. It's processed there, and then it's shipped 40 days to, say, Europe. Shortening the supply chains is also of importance.
Right, and finally, Reinhard, if you were to advise Taiwan's government here, given its policy on the Arctic region, and particularly what we're seeing, the rush for Greenland and the interest around it, both industrially and geopolitically, what would your advice be to Taiwan's government and how they approach this that part of the world?
Well, vertical supply chains are very important, from the raw materials to high-tech products like semiconductors. And Taiwan in recent years has come to believe that possess the most fancy technology, like these wonderful TSMC semiconductors, would act as a silicon shield. The Greenland example, however, shows that possessing precious materials, possessing precious economic stakes may also lead to exposure. So Greenland, once an economic and political periphery, is now in the center of geopolitical concerns, like, for instance, the Greenland, Iceland, United Kingdom maritime choke point, which connects the Arctic Ocean with the transatlantic ocean. So security interests become very important. So the idea about the silicon shield has to be seen more balanced. We also see that, again, the United States administration did not only put pressure on Greenland, but also on Taiwan to invest more in the United States. So USA does not only want to de-risk and diversify from China, but also from Taiwan. So that is, I think, a very important lesson Taiwan also has to learn. And neither Taiwan nor Greenland are really geopolitical exceptions or except from other political actors and entities, but they are in the middle, in the center of geopolitical concerns. And I think Taiwan should carefully study what is going on in Greenland as well, and what this means for Taiwan and the idea about the silicon shield.